I've always suffered from skin hunger, but the floating comments in the air kept saying, "My husband is keeping himself pure and chaste for his one true love." In a fit of pique, I went to my imperial brother and demanded 10 male companions. When Xie Yunjian returned to the princess mansion, his first instinct was to come see me. My most spoiled favorite waved a hand and shoved him away without a second thought. "Newcomer, get to the back of the line." It was in the second year of my marriage to Xie Yunjian that I suddenly started seeing lines of text floating in the air. "The male lead is going to extreme lengths to stay celibate for the female lead. Rumor has it is actually impotent and has been taking medicine to treat it." What a load of nonsense. If the male lead can't perform, then who in this story can? Sometimes I really envy the second female lead's obliviousness. The male lead won't even spare her a glance. Yet she still thinks he's too inferior to dare look at her. I froze, a flicker of realization dawning on me. I thought immediately of Xie Yunjian. He and I had never once shared a bed. In the first month of our marriage, he'd said the Xie family had always upheld strict moral values and that he was not accustomed to being intimate with women, so he was not yet ready to sleep with me. In the second month, he'd claimed he'd fallen off his horse while hunting and needed 3 months of bed rest to recover. 6 months into the marriage, he'd hung his head, his cheeks flushing bright red, and told me the hunting accident had injured him where it mattered most. He'd need even more time to recuperate, he said. That recuperation stretched into another 6 months. I truly believed he was impotent, too afraid to ask more questions for fear of embarrassing him. Besides, I'd thought that as husband and wife, we ought to be faithful to each other, so I'd never sought out anyone else. Every night, I'd endured the gnawing emptiness alone, wrapping myself tightly in my quilt to chase away the cold. Now, anger bubbled up inside me. If he wanted to keep himself pure for his sweetheart, why hadn't he just said so earlier? Made me suffer all this time for nothing. Before the floating comments could finish scrolling, I climbed into my carriage and rushed straight to the palace. I treated my imperial brother like a genie in a lamp, there to grant my every wish. Clasping my hands together, I closed my eyes and prayed piously. "I want 10 male companions." The comments exploded. I was just about to say the second female lead has looks and power, she shouldn't waste her time on one man. Turns out she didn't even need our advice. My imperial brother's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "You want how many male companions?" I lifted my chin, my voice firm and unwavering. 10. He stared at me, utterly flabbergasted. "Do you know how many concubines I get from a single imperial selection? You're asking for 10 at once. 10 men with clean family backgrounds, perfect looks and figures, good temperaments, just turning 20, pure in body and mind, and willing to bow their heads and serve you loyally." I felt a twinge of embarrassment, ducking my head shyly. "The requirements can be relaxed a little." He let out a long, relieved sigh. "Relaxed in which aspects?" I replied without hesitation. "Their age can be a few years younger." The floating comments were equally shocked. The second female lead truly refuses to suffer even the tiniest bit of hardship. Can I be in this drama for just 2 episodes? I'd lower my standards even more. I'd settle for 2 18-year-olds. My imperial brother. I covered my face with my sleeve and launched into my tried-and-true guilt trip, sniffling and whimpering. "Am I being too difficult for you, brother? I never would have needed to ask for this if things had been different. It all started when I was born. Mother was thrown into the cold palace in a hurry. She only had time to arrange your future. She didn't spare a second thought for me." Every time the second female lead brings up her past, it's like watching me force a template into my college entrance exam essay. But her brother really does feel guilty about her, so this trick works every single time. My imperial brother knew all about my childhood neglect, how it had left me craving physical affection more than anything. He frowned, letting out a soft sigh. "Fine, I grant your request." 10 men were sent to the princess mansion that very day. I sat lazily on my carved wooden chair, propping my chin in my hand as I looked down at the line of men kneeling on the steps below. I was spoilt for choice. My female official, Yuan Shu, began introducing them to me one by one. "Your Highness, this is Wei Qi, the illegitimate son of the Marquis of Yongning. He is 19 years old. He has been in poor health since childhood. With a weak stomach, he can only eat soft, easily digestible food. The young man standing at the front bowed deeply to me. He was tall and slender. Dressed in plain white silk robes that billowed gently in the breeze blowing through the hall, making him look even more fragile and delicate. The corners of his eyes were faintly flushed, like he'd been crying. "I beg your Highness's mercy and care." Lust stirred in my heart, but I kept my face impassive. I wouldn't speak a word until I'd seen every single one of them. Wei Qi stepped back, and another young man stepped forward. Yuan Shu continued, "This is Shen Xiao, the youngest son of the loyal and martial general. He is 18. He has admired your highness from afar for a long time and only wishes to serve you with all his heart." The boy who approached had eyebrows sharp as a blade and eyes bright as stars. His skin was a healthy wheat color from spending time outdoors, and there was a sharp, youthful energy in his every glance. He looked up at me, a faint, charming smile playing on his lips. "I pay my respects to your highness." I sat up a little straighter in my chair. My indecision grew stronger by the second. The floating comments had already started a vote. "I'm calling it for today. Vote Shen Xiao. Does no one appreciate Wei Qi? Where's the male lead? Does no one care? Chasing after the female lead, obviously. Never mind him, let's see the other 8 candidates. Right, on to the next one. Next." Yuan Shu's tone grew a touch more respectful. "This is the state uncle, Lord Su Zhenliu. He is 18 years old." She paused for a moment, looking slightly flustered. And the 2 young men beside him are his attendants, sent along with him." The comments were just as shocked as I was. "Isn't this the main villain of the story? Even he came to the selection." Selection shows are the best. They let you skip 3 years of hard work and climb the ladder overnight. The thought of these 2 fierce bodyguards cosplaying as attendants is killing me. Su Zhenliu, I'd seen him a few times before. He was the younger brother of my imperial sister-in-law, a famous nobleman in the capital, known for his elegance and aloofness. He wanted to be my companion. I looked down at the man standing on the steps. He was dressed in a moon-white silk robe, his eyes as cold and clear as a mountain spring. The 2 young men flanking him were both wearing bright, gaudy red robes, their hair styled in twin ponytails that made them look more like warriors than attendants, only serving to make Su Zhenliu himself look even more refined and otherworldly in comparison. I rested my chin in my hand, leaning forward slightly. "If you're being held against your will, just blink twice." He looked up at me. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, the air seemed to stand still. He stared at me for a long, long time, not blinking once until his eyes turned red, and tears pooled in their corners, glistening like dew. I clapped my hands in amusement. "You've got quite the stamina for holding back tears." He smiled faintly, his voice as clear and melodious as trickling mountain spring water. "It took so much effort to finally get to see your highness." I didn't dare blink, afraid I might miss a single moment. At his words, the eyes of the first 2 candidates widened in shock. "I feel so bad for you too. You just left the newbie village and immediately ran into a master of manipulation. You too have been played by the nobility." I thought for a moment. Today, I choose Su Zhenliu. He was so attentive. His words were so sweet, and he even came with bonus attendants. I simply couldn't say no to a man like that. After nightfall, Su Zhenliu was bathed and groomed, then sent to my bedroom. He removed his outer robe and jade hair crown, letting his black hair fall down his back like a waterfall of ink. Only a snow-white inner garment clung to his slender frame. As soon as he entered the room, he walked over to open the window. Moonlight streamed in, casting a soft glow over his face, making his skin look as smooth as jade and his features as delicate as a painting. "I can't take this anymore. This guy is basically posing for a portrait, even arranging the lighting himself. Su Zhenliu be like, a little scheming never hurt anyone." He turned to look at me, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. When our eyes met, I thought I heard the clear, melodious sound of a flute playing in the distance. Could it be that I was actually falling for him? This was ancient times. Who on earth was playing background music? I took a step closer to him, only to circle around and look out the window instead. The 2 twin ponytailed attendants were squatting by the wall, playing the flute in perfect harmony. The 2 little tufts of hair on top of their heads bobbed up and down with each breath they took to play, Can they please change their hairstyle? I'm genuinely afraid the second female lead will mistake them for cockroaches and swat them. I rolled my eyes, slamming the window shut with a loud bang, but when I turned to see Su Junlio's gentle, innocent expression, my tone softened involuntarily. It's very thoughtful of you to go through all this trouble for me. I took Su Junlio's hand in mine, gazing into his eyes as if sharing my deepest, most heartfelt secrets. The moon is so bright tonight, isn't it? Oh, by the way, are you, the tips of his ears turned bright red, his long eyelashes fluttering nervously. His eyes were like a pool of autumn water, shimmering with ripples of emotion. Your Highness, he said, his voice somehow turning husky, like it was laced with honey and hooks. Would you like to find out? The floating comments blazed to life. Yes, go all in, lose yourself in the moment, throw caution to the wind. The comments were so obvious I was afraid they'd be seen. I slowly pulled my hand away from his. Maybe another time, definitely next time. Su Junlio's eyes drooped. His expression falling. As your Highness wishes. He got played. First the villain gets played. Now even I feel played. Oh, the villain's upset. Looks like the male lead is in for another world of hurt. Su Junlio and I lay down to sleep, fully clothed. He was tall, taking up the spot where my stuffed doll used to be. With nothing to hug, I felt that familiar, unbearable emptiness creeping in again. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed his arm. He lowered his head. His voice soft with concern. Your Highness. I rolled over and snuggled into his arms, wrapping my legs around his lean waist. I clung to him like a koala clinging to a tree. In the darkness of the night, his body stiffened slightly, freezing in place. My hand curved around the back of his neck. I could feel the places where our skin touched growing warm, almost hot. I adjusted my position, nuzzling my face into the crook of his neck. Now I felt comfortable. Finally, I could fall asleep. Just before I drifted off, I vaguely saw the floating comments scrolling past again. No way, are you really just going to sleep like this? She's toying with this big bad villain in a new way every day. I squinted my eyes. I wasn't fully asleep yet. Something hard was pressing against my waist, digging into me uncomfortably. I hadn't had a good night's sleep in ages, so I let out a long, dissatisfied whine. Su Junlio, what's this? He pressed a hand over mine. His voice hoarse and strained with embarrassment. Your Highness, wait a moment. He shifted his position to hold me more comfortably, then pulled out a small wooden token and placed it on the pillow beside us. It's a token of office. I blinked sleepily, glancing at it lazily. Oh, it really was a token. I slept soundly through the night, waking up feeling refreshed and energized. Su Junlio, however, looked like he hadn't slept a wink. There were faint dark circles under his eyes. His face pale and tired. I wriggled out of his arms and sat up. He rose with me immediately. Allow me to help your Highness get dressed. I spread my arms, letting him slip my long-sleeved robe over my head and tie the sash at my waist. I couldn't help but zone out for a moment. What a miserable existence I'd been living before this. Now, I had someone to accompany me to breakfast, someone to peel grapes for me. I was riding high on cloud 9, overflowing with satisfaction. I summoned all 10 of my male companions to the back garden. They lined up neatly in front of me, each more handsome than the last, a feast for the eyes. Truly, Wei Yiqi was delicate and sickly, Shen Xiao was sharp and heroic, Su Junlio was gentle and refined, the rest were a mix of aloof, romantic, and mysterious. Even the 2 attendants who'd come with Su Junlio were handsome in their own right, with a quiet charm about them. Give me wand please, sister, I'll never root for the male lead again. Teach me how to transmigrate into this book. I smiled faintly, taking a piece of red silk from Yuan Shu's hand. I tied it around my eyes, knotting it securely at the back of my head. Shen Xiao realized what I was about to do and called out in a clear, cheerful voice, Your Highness, come catch me Tilda. I hitched up the hem of my skirt and lunged forward. I didn't even come close to touching him. All I smelled was a faint, elegant scent of agarwood. A warm, gentle voice sounded right behind me. Your Highness, I'm right here, behind you. I hadn't even had time to turn around. That clear, youthful voice rang out again, seemingly right beside my ear. Come catch me, Your Highness. I lunged to the right, only to stumble forward and grab nothing but air. I felt a folding fan glide slowly across my palm, a faint tickle spreading from my fingertips all the way to the bottom of my heart. I was having too much fun. A grin spread from ear to ear, splitting my face wide open. Suddenly, someone tore the red silk blindfold off my eyes. A voice filled with barely contained anger thundered, "Is this how you behave when I'm not around? Making a fool of yourself like this?" The man standing before me was none other than my husband, Xie Yunjian. It seemed I'd been living too comfortably these days, so comfortable that I'd forgotten to put him in his place. The sudden burst of light stung my eyes. I squinted, turning to glare at Xie Yunjian. He was furious. His brows were furrowed tightly, a frosty glint in his eyes. He was always so calm and composed, rarely did he ever lose his temper like this. Su Junliu shot him a cool, indifferent glance. One of his attendants, still sporting those ridiculous twin ponytails, immediately charged forward. Shaking his head as he shouldered Xie Yunjian roughly out of the way, "Newcomer, get to the back of the line. His Highness hasn't even let me serve her yet. Who do you think you are, cutting in line?" Xie Yunjian staggered back a step. He clamped a hand down on the sword at his waist, his cold gaze sweeping over the assembled men. "I am the imperial consort," he declared icily. "I was betrothed to Her Highness by the late emperor himself. With all 3 letters and 6 rituals of a proper marriage. Do any of you even compare?" 10 pairs of eyes fixed on him simultaneously. Shen Xiao muttered under his breath, "Forgot to bring my sword today, otherwise, I'd have a little spar with him." Su Junliu's other attendant let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Imperial consort, before Her Highness, you're nothing but a subject. The only one who matters here is whomever Her Highness favors." I stared at the scene unfolding before me. Wide-eyed and open-mouthed, it was so entertaining that I'd completely forgotten I was supposed to be the main character. For a moment, I didn't utter a single word. I feel like the male lead's heart is about to shatter into a million pieces. The second female lead really is spoiling her companions and destroying her husband. What are you all jabbering about? The male lead and female lead are the official couple, not shipping the official couple anymore. The male lead clearly cares way too much about the second female lead. His heart's not pure anymore. I'm taking the female lead and leaving. What if the male lead just feels humiliated? After all, he's still the second female lead's legally wedded husband. The way she's acting right now is basically rubbing his face in the dirt. Let's wait and see what happens. Su Junliu walked slowly toward me. He lowered his eyes, his expression tinged with a touch of sorrow, his voice soft and gentle. "Have I put your Highness in a difficult position? I do not seek a title or status. I only feel sorry for your Highness, having to spend so many sleepless nights alone. I merely wish to stay by your side and ease your troubles." Xie Yunjian's face turned ashen with rage. In the blink of an eye, he drew his sword, silver light flashing as the blade pressed against Su Junliu's neck. Sharp and cold. "Holy crap, they're about to fight. Princess, say something, do something." Su Junliu didn't take a single step back. He just looked at Xie Yunjian calmly, his eyes unwavering. Tiny beads of blood oozed from the cut on his neck, trickling slowly down the blade of the sword. Xie Yunjian gritted his teeth so hard his jaw twitched. His eyes turned red, but instead of looking at Su Junliu, he fixed his gaze on me. "Did you share a bed with him?" Now it was my turn to speak. I nodded calmly, my expression completely unruffled. Yes, there was no point in denying it. It was the truth. We had shared a bed. If I'd gotten all these male companions just to not sleep with them, then what was the point? I feel so bad for the male lead. What a huge slap in the face. The second female lead clearly used to like the male lead. Why is she treating him like this now? She's a princess, for heaven's sake. Her mother is the Empress Dowager, and her brother is the reigning emperor with real power. What's a little infidelity to someone like her? When a prince takes concubines, does anyone call it cheating on his princess? The floating comments exploded into an argument. Complete chaos had broken loose. Xie Yunjian didn't say a word. He just bit his lip so hard it turned white, tears pooling in his eyes, glistening like broken glass. I sighed softly. "Put the sword down. Yuan Shu, go to the palace and fetch the imperial physician at once. It would be a great pity if Lord Su were to be left with a scar." Xie Yunjian's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, his knuckles turning white as veins bulged on his wrist. He closed his eyes for a moment, then reluctantly lowered the blade, his body trembling with suppressed anger and frustration. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, almost broken. "When I heard you'd taken in male companions, I rushed back from Qi Prefecture overnight. I didn't sleep a wink the entire journey. We had an agreement, remember? You promised you'd wait for me." Wait a minute, he wanted her to wait for him. Then what about the female lead? What's her place in all this? Never mind all that, who would make a better main husband? The male lead or the villain? The villain, hands down. The male lead can't even keep his cool, he pulls a sword at the drop of a hat. If he ever loses his temper properly, the princess's harem would turn into a bloodbath. Between the male lead and the villain, they can't even scrape together 8 hours of sleep combined. What a bunch of nonsense. I averted my gaze, trying my best to ignore the floating comments and maintain an air of calm seriousness. "I waited for you for a whole year." I paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. The two attendants chimed in again, eager to join the fray. "That's right, that's right. How many years does a person have in their life, anyway? You can't waste them all waiting around." Me, Xie Yunjian. They were just spouting random lines. Like they were reciting from a script, they'd completely interrupted my dramatic moment. I cleared my throat loudly, regaining my composure. "Do you have any more excuses to give me? Any reason left for me to wait a moment longer?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I hitched up the hem of my skirt and turned on my heel, walking away without looking back. A harem with this many men was nothing but trouble. I didn't have time to deal with it right now. I'd just run away. I hid outside until evening, the sun dipping below the horizon. The floating comments were getting more and more frantic. "Sister, are you raising a bunch of feral beasts in your backyard? Are you just going to let them fight it out until only one is left standing? Then pick him. Why aren't you going back to restore order? They're going to kill each other if you don't." I sighed deeply. I was a princess, for crying out loud, not a homeroom teacher. Was I really supposed to march back there and say, "Put down your swords, children, anyone caught arguing will have their names written down"? Absolutely not. Just then, Xie Yunjian appeared out of nowhere. My head was spinning with all the chaos. I decided I'd just go back to my room, hug my stuffed doll, and sleep alone for the night to clear my head. I returned to my palace. Pushing the door open only to find Xie Yunjian standing inside, waiting for me. I hadn't expected to see him here, even though we were husband and wife. We'd been sleeping in separate rooms for a long, long time. Xie Yunjian dropped to one knee before me, reaching out to grab the hem of my sleeve. His fingers trembling slightly, he looked up at me, his phoenix eyes clear and beautiful, filled with a desperation I'd never seen before, his voice laced with a hint of pleading. "Who are you, if you want this? If you want me, I can do it now, I can be yours." With his free hand, he slowly began to unfasten the sash of his robe. Layer by layer, his outer garments fell to the floor, pooling around his knees. His robe hung open at the chest, revealing his well-defined collarbones and the smooth planes of his abdomen. The flickering candlelight cast warm, golden shadows over the contours of his muscles. His chest rose and fell rapidly with each ragged breath he took. His hand slid carefully into my sleeve, wrapping around my wrist, his fingers intertwining with mine. His palm was burning hot against my skin. I stared at him, dumbfounded. I'd completely forgotten that I was supposed to be yelling at him for his earlier behavior. What was I supposed to do now? Tell him to stop? My heart fluttered, a familiar, unbearable itch spreading through my body, a craving for physical touch. It was all the fault of my skin hunger, really. He knelt forward, inching closer to me on his knees. Until he'd backed me up against the desk by the wall. I leaned against the edge of the desk, my body lifted slightly off the ground by his strong arm wrapped around my waist. My other hand was still clasped tightly in his grip firm, leaving me no room to pull away. The floating comments were screaming. As expected of the male lead, "He's so strong. Someone save my ship." Never mind, the female lead hasn't even shown up yet. I'll just treat this as a spicy romance novel and enjoy the ride. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Yuan Shu's voice. She was the only one who would dare disturb me at a time like this. "Your Highness." Lord Su says his neck hurts terribly. He wishes to see you. Su Zhenliu, I swear to God, couldn't you have picked any other time to be in pain? Forget him. It's just a different man, you can make do with this one for tonight. I glanced down at Xie Yunjian. His lips were pressed into a thin, tight line, his eyes locking onto mine. In his gaze, I saw something fragile, something that looked like it was on the verge of shattering completely. He'd all but stripped himself bare, but I was still fully clothed, my robe neat and proper. I placed both hands on the desk behind me to steady myself, straightening my clothes with a calm expression. Are you going to leave? He asked, his voice cold, almost icy. I nodded. The imperial physician is still staying at the mansion, isn't he? He said, his tone laced with bitterness. You don't even know how to heal wounds. Why do you have to go see him? I fixed my hair, securing my hairpin in place, before replying softly, I know, but he was wrong today. He's feeling upset. I just want to go comfort him. I never would have deliberately humiliated Xie Yunjian like this. But then I remembered what the floating comments had said about the female lead, about how he'd been keeping himself pure for her all this time. And suddenly, I didn't feel quite so inclined to be kind to him anymore. He had a body like this, all lean muscles and smooth skin, and he'd hidden it from me for a whole year. What a waste. Xie Yunjian fell silent, his shoulders slumping slightly. He bent down to pick up his scattered robes from the floor, pulling them on over his shoulders without looking at me. He turned his back to me, his posture stiff, refusing to let me see his face. His voice was thick with emotion, like he was on the verge of tears. Will you come back? That was a hard question to answer. I had no idea what kind of trick Su Zhenliu had up his sleeve to make me stay. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. You should go to sleep first, I said, pausing in the doorway. Don't wait up for me. I hadn't walked more than a few steps when I heard a sharp, ear-piercing sound coming from behind me. Was he sharpening his sword in there? When I arrived at Su Zhenliu's room, he was sitting in front of the dressing table. Staring at his reflection in the bronze mirror, a strip of white silk was wrapped around his slender neck, covering the faint cut left by Xie Yunjian's sword. The silk was a little too long, tied in a neat knot at the nape of his neck. I didn't let the servants announce my arrival. Instead, I tiptoed quietly into the room, circling around until I stood behind him. Does it hurt badly? I asked, my voice soft. He reached up, taking my hand in his fingers warm against my skin. Now that your highness is here, he said, turning to look at me with a gentle smile, it doesn't hurt anymore. I raised one hand, untying the knot at the back of his neck. Let me see, I said. The white silk fell away, slipping off his neck and onto his lap. Beneath it, his neck was smooth and pale as jade, only a faint, pinkish scar marring the otherwise perfect skin. The floating comments were ruthless. If they'd called the imperial physician any later, this wound would have already healed on its own. Sister, you just took off his fashion accessory. I thought for a moment, then picked up the white silk from his lap and tied it around his eyes, covering them gently. There, now it was a fashion accessory again. Black hair cascading down his back, plain white robes, and a strip of white silk blindfolded across his eyes. He looked even more ethereal and beautiful than before. I stood there, admiring my handiwork. While mentally debating which sleeping position would be the most comfortable tonight, I was halfway through my deliberations when someone knocked on the door again. Really, the men in my harem were nothing but trouble, always causing a commotion. I decided I'd have to give Yuan Shu a raise for putting up with all this. She entered the room with my permission, carrying a wooden tray in her hands. On the tray sat a porcelain bowl filled with dark, murky liquid herbal medicine. By the looks of it, this was just brewed by the imperial consort, she explained, her voice hesitant, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. It's a contraceptive tonic, for Lord Su. I froze, staring at the bowl in disbelief. While he'd been away in Qi Prefecture this past year, was he not only taking medicine for his impotence, but also learning how to brew contraceptive tonics? Su Zhenliu didn't say a word. He stood up slowly, the white silk blindfold slipping down his face as he moved, revealing his eyes, bright and glistening, like they were filled with starlight. He reached out to take the bowl from Yuan Shu's hands, his long eyelashes fluttering slightly against his cheeks. The edge of the bowl was just about to touch his lips when I reached out and stopped him, my hand wrapping around his wrist. I turned to look at Yuan Shu, my voice calm and firm. Go tell the imperial consort that he doesn't need to bother brewing this kind of medicine anymore. It's completely unnecessary. Su Zhenliu and I hadn't even had any physical intimacy beyond sharing a bed. There was no reason for him to drink this. Yuan Shu nodded, bowing her head respectfully. As your highness commands. As soon as she left, I grabbed the bowl from Su Zhenliu's hand and poured its contents out the window without a second thought. A muffled grunt of pain sounded from outside the window. Looks like it landed right on the ambience team. Those two twin ponytailed attendants just got hit with their own insecticide. My hand froze mid-air. The empty bowl still in my grasp, I turned to look at Su Zhenliu instinctively, my eyes wide with surprise. Su Zhenliu met my gaze, remaining silent for a moment before blinking slowly, a faint, amused smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The room fell into a heavy, tense silence. A faint, listless flute melody drifted in from outside the window again. Guess it was time to use the background music to cover up the awkward silence. Suddenly, the sound of raindrops pattering against the banana leaves filled the air. Somehow, it had started to rain outside without anyone noticing. Su Zhenliu lifted his eyes, gazing at the slanting threads of rain streaming through the window. What bad luck, Your Highness, he said softly. The rain seems to be picking up. Rare footage of ancient humans performing artificial rainfall. He rose to his feet, crossing the room to close the window. The floating comments wasted no time in calling him out. He's getting better at covering his tracks now. I knew all about his little tricks. Once upon a time, Xie Yunjian and I had treated each other with nothing but distant respect, polite, yet always keeping each other at arm's length. Su Zhenliu was the first man who had ever gone to such lengths just to make me stay. He lacked neither power nor status, and he asked nothing of me in return. It was utterly refreshing. I smiled faintly. Then I suppose I'll have to stay. All the servants in the room were dismissed. Su Zhenliu stood beside the Boshan incense burner, picking up a silver incense spoon and scooping out half a spoonful of agarwood incense. He lit the agarwood slowly, a faint, sweet fragrance drifting through the silk curtains, through the gauzy canopy of the bed curtains. He looked over at me, the corners of his lips curving into a soft smile. This agarwood incense was blended by my own hands. Your Highness, it has a calming effect. Prop count +1. What was he rambling on about? I didn't care to listen. I just wanted to wrap my arms around him. Leaning back against the bed, I crooked a finger at him, hinting wildly. He pushed aside the bed curtains with one hand, backlit by the warm glow of the candlelight, looking as if he had stepped straight out of a painting. 666. Even the mosquito net is basically a photo shoot backdrop at this point. How could the second female lead not be completely smitten by this? I frowned slightly, feeling a little indignant. I wasn't the kind of person who fell for someone just because of their looks. Su Zhenliu approached the bed. As soon as I saw his face, I threw back the covers and patted the empty spot beside me. Actually, I was exactly the kind of person who fell for someone just because of their looks. Perhaps it was the effect of the agarwood incense. Or perhaps it was because I'd clung to him so tightly through the night. I slept soundly, waking up the next morning with a healthy, glowing complexion. Su Zhenliu, on the other hand, looked a little haggard, making me look like some kind of seductive succubus who drained his energy dry. I was completely baffled by this. That was, until I saw the floating comments. Does the second female lead even realize she's a terrible sleeper? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I had no idea about this, but apparently, everyone else did. I don't even want to say anything about where her hands were wandering last night. Oh, did you see that? Upstairs. Wasn't that part pixelated? I'm just using my imagination. I let out a huge sigh of relief, my heart finally settling back in my chest. I called for water to wash up. Yuan Shu entered the room again. My eyelids twitched. I had a bad feeling that something else was about to go wrong. Great, just what I needed first thing in the morning. She looked equally awkward, her voice soft and her words tumbling out in a rush. The imperial consort is currently laying down rules for the young masters in the backyard. Only Lord Su hasn't been summoned yet. The imperial consort sent me to invite him. I stared at her, speechless and confused. Lord Su didn't get much rest last night. He's excused, I said flatly. Once the imperial consort has finished with his rules, tell him to come see me in my room. I have some questions for him. Xie Yunjian and I had never had a particularly deep relationship to begin with. He came from a noble family, was promising and talented at a young age, and was more than handsome enough to be worthy of me, that was all. He'd never once meddled in my affairs before. Now, all of a sudden, he was acting like the head of the household, throwing his weight around. It was utterly bewildering. When Xie Yunjian came to see me, I was sitting at my desk, writing a divorce agreement. Not that a divorce agreement would actually hold any weight, of course. We needed an imperial edict to officially end the marriage, but I had nothing better to do. So I was writing it just for fun. I held up the rice paper, fanning it gently to dry the ink, and read over the carefully chosen words I'd written. I read it once, then again, a satisfied smile spreading across my face. I really was quite cultured. The paper was suddenly snatched out of my hand. Xie Yunjian crumpled it into a ball, his fingers tightening around it until his knuckles turned white. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse and broken as he forced out a few words with great difficulty. Who are you? Why? A single tear slid down his cheek, landing on the back of my hand. I froze. He stared at me, his voice cracking with suppressed sobs, his chest heaving with each ragged breath he took. Half his face was streaked with tears. My illness is cured, he said, his voice trembling. If you've grown tired of me, if you want to be with other men, that's fine. I don't mind, as long as they never forget their place, as long as they never dare to overstep me. Who are you? We were childhood sweethearts who grew up together. We were never supposed to end up like this. I sighed softly, rising to my feet and handing him a handkerchief. Seeing him cry so beautifully, my tone softened involuntarily. Don't cry first, I said gently. I'll talk to you properly. Let's just calm down. He bent down, leaning into my hand, and rubbed his cheek against the handkerchief, his eyes closing for a moment as he soaked up the warmth of my touch. Once his tears were wiped away, his clear, bright phoenix eyes were revealed once more. Where on earth had he learned to be so clingy? He took the handkerchief from my hand, tucking it carefully into his robe as if it were a priceless treasure, wanting to have his cake and eat it too. How typical. I glanced up at the floating comments. Oh my God, he's been completely transformed. Did he cram all night on how to be a clingy, coquettish man just because he thought the second female lead liked that type? Hilarious. Quick. Interrogate him, ask him if he's ever really loved you. Ask him who he'd save first if you and the female lead were drowning. I cleared my throat, gathering my thoughts, before pulling a booklet off the bookshelf and tossing it to him. You know her, I said flatly. You two were childhood sweethearts, weren't you? The booklet contained information I'd had someone look up. The female lead that the floating comments kept talking about, her name was Wei Yuan. She was from Qi Prefecture and had studied medicine since she was a child. She was also Xie Yunjian's one true love, his so-called white moonlight. She had never left Qi Prefecture. Yet Xie Yunjian had gone there time and time again under the pretense of seeking treatment for his illness. The last time he'd gone, he'd stayed for 2 whole months. Rare footage of ancient humans conducting a background check. The female lead forgot to bring her ID. So the male lead went to provoke the second female lead, and 2 minutes later, the female lead's household registration was in the male lead's hands. I frowned. What nonsense were they spouting now? I'd obtained this information through my imperial brother, directly from the Ministry of Revenue. It was completely above board. This wasn't even the original document, it was a copy I'd transcribed by hand myself. To protect her privacy, no one else had been allowed to see it. Now that I thought about it carefully, I really was a bit of a villain, wasn't I? Going so far as to get my hands on her household registration like that. Oh well, what did it matter? I was the evil second female lead. After all, Xie Yunjian caught the booklet deftly. He flipped through a few pages, his dim eyes lighting up bit by bit, like stars emerging from behind the clouds. So you've been keeping your distance from me because of her? He asked, his voice filled with hope. It's not that you've truly grown tired of me. Why was he looking so happy all of a sudden? He was celebrating way too early. I wouldn't say it's entirely because of her. I replied coolly. If he'd had someone else in his heart, he should have told me from the very beginning. I had genuinely wanted to make our marriage work at first, but he'd chosen to keep himself pure and chaste for someone else and forced me to live a life of celibacy right along with him. I lowered my eyes. Tapping the desk lightly with my fingers, "You should have told me about this earlier," I said quietly. "This matter, you had a duty to inform me." And then the princess quoted a dream of red mansions, romance of the three kingdoms, water margin, and journey to the west all in one go. "And then you led your troops to surround his house and shook all his family's eggs until the yolks broke, and then you arrested the female lead's master, forcing the female lead to choose between him and the male lead. Faced with the emperor's coercion, the princess's oppression, and the nobility's inducements, the male lead could no longer bear it. He raised his army in Qi Prefecture, firing the first shot in the fight against imperialism and feudalism. Me, Xie Yunjian, watched the expression on my face change, rushing to explain himself. "I do know her. It's true, but we're not close, let alone childhood sweethearts," he said earnestly. "I went to Qi Prefecture only to seek treatment for my illness. There are plenty of people who can vouch for that. I never even met her while I was there. It's not that I didn't want to be with you, it's just that, until a few days ago, I really couldn't." He took a shaky breath, his words coming out in a rush, clearly embarrassed by the topic. "The night before our wedding, someone slipped poison into my drink while I wasn't looking," he confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I managed to counteract the poison with great difficulty, but then I was attacked again. Before I'd fully recovered, it wasn't until 2 days ago that I was completely cured." His voice softened to a murmur, barely audible. "I was just so afraid that you'd reject me, that you'd abandon me. So I made up those excuses." So he really was impotent. That's such a dirty trick. Who did this to him? Was it the villain? Does the villain have a copy of the script too? This script is way more detailed than the one we're reading. Is that even allowed? I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. It turned out that not everything the floating comments said was true. That villain had quite the nerve, daring to lay a hand on the imperial consort. I said, my voice turning cold. "I'll send Yuan Shu to investigate this for you." His long eyelashes fluttered. "What about the divorce?" he asked hesitantly. I felt a sudden wave of irritation and confusion wash over me. "Let's put that on hold for now," I said tiredly. My mind was a mess. I dismissed everyone, picked up my stuffed doll, and lay down on the daybed, memories of the past flooding my mind unbidden. The first time I'd met Xie Yunjian had been in early spring. I'd been 6 years old, just starting my formal education. For a princess, that was considered quite late, but it was all because my foster mother had hated my birth mother and had deliberately neglected me out of spite. He'd been 2 years older than me, serving as a study companion to one of my other imperial brothers. His phoenix eyes had been clear and bright, the black and white perfectly distinct, the corners slanting slightly upward. His gaze had been as cold and clear as a mountain spring, noble and upright like the moon hanging high in the sky. I'd stared at him a little too long. The nanny who'd been watching over me had sneered, mocking me quietly. "Don't bother looking, princess," she'd said disdainfully. "Second young Master Xie comes from a distinguished family. He has a bright future ahead of him. He'd never be willing to become a mere imperial consort." I'd been young, but I'd known full well that she was twisting my words, deliberately trying to embarrass me. I'd rubbed my fingers, which had been covered in chilblains from the cold, and lowered my head, murmuring softly, "I understand." Later, my mother had been restored to her rightful position, and my elder brother had been named crown prince. Everyone had felt guilty toward me, going out of their way to compensate me for all the wrongs I'd suffered. Those who had bullied me in the past had all gotten their comeuppance. Everything I'd once been denied, I now had 100 times over. Only Xie Yunjian had remained the same. When I'd been down and out, he'd shown me kindness and care. When I'd risen to power and glory, he'd treated me with the same distant respect as always. I had everything I could ever want, but I'd always found myself thinking about the nanny's words from that day. By then, I'd been a teenager, just starting to understand the stirrings of love. Every time I saw him, my heart would flutter uncontrollably. I'd wanted to see him lose his composure over me. I'd wanted to see him throw away his bright future just for me. I'd clung to that dark, insecure desire for 2 whole months, humiliating myself, debasing myself, just to get his attention. That was, until Su Yuten had appeared in my life. She was my future sister-in-law, Su Zhenliu's elder sister. She came from a noble family, yet she was free-spirited and unconventional, often disguising herself as a man to sneak me out of the palace. We'd sat on the palace rooftops together, drinking wine and watching the stars. We'd ridden horses through the streets side by side. Once, when her father had gone south to provide disaster relief, she'd even taken the risk of smuggling me out of the capital with him, letting me see the hardships of the common people with my own eyes, taking me to hand out porridge to the hungry. I'd donated all the jewelry I'd been wearing when I'd left the palace. She'd told me that there were far more meaningful things in this world to pursue than a man's affection. When we'd returned to the palace, my mother had flown into a rage, threatening to punish Su Yuten severely. I'd knelt beside her for hours, begging for mercy, until my mother had finally relented and dropped the matter. Su Yuten had learned nothing from the experience. She still dared to sneak me out of the palace, taking me to go spring outing with the young men outside the palace walls. "Do you have your eye on anyone, Your Highness?" she'd asked me with a grin. "There are so many men in this world. Why waste your time pining after Xie Yunzhan?" I'd twisted my fingers awkwardly, feeling too shy to admit the truth. But there had been someone I'd liked. In the crowd of young men, there had been a boy. His stature wasn't quite as tall as Xie Yunzhan's, but he was still tall enough. He'd been wearing a white robe and a bamboo hat, his back turned to me. A chattering sparrow was perched on his shoulder. Every now and then, he would turn his head slightly, smiling as he teased the little sparrow. I couldn't see his face, but I somehow thought he looked clean, pure, like the first snow of winter. Su Yuten laughed out loud. "Oh, that's my 3rd younger brother," she said with a grin. "He's 3 years younger than Your Highness. I'm afraid you'll have to wait a few more years for him to grow up." Me. Kids shouldn't be allowed to run around out here, wasting people's affections like this. I stopped looking up at Xie Yunzhan after that. I started living my life for myself, boldly, freely, without a care in the world. I stayed by my mother's side until I turned 18. It wasn't until my father fell gravely ill, worrying that he delayed my marriage for too long, that he rushed to choose a husband for me. I still chose Xie Yunzhan in the end. Later, when my elder brother ascended the throne, he shortened the mourning period for the imperial clan to stabilize the political situation. A year after that, I married Xie Yunzhan. It wasn't because of some lingering obsession, it was simply because he satisfied me. He was suitable, nothing more, nothing less. Wait a minute, I opened my eyes. Counting on my fingers, after my birthday this year, I'd be 21. Su Zhenliu had said he was 18. Had he lied about his age? I sent someone to fetch Su Zhenliu at once. He must have already known what I'd found out. His hair was loose, unbound, and he stumbled into the room looking utterly lost and dejected. He was dressed in plain, unadorned clothes, but somehow, they only made him look more elegant and refined, like a scholar who'd stepped out of a poem. I suddenly didn't feel so inclined to scold him anymore. It wasn't that big of a deal, anyway. After bowing to me, he stood at the bottom of the steps, his head hanging low. "Has Your Highness found out?" I nodded. "I have." Beneath the sleeves of his robe, his fingers curled slightly into fists. "I know I deserve to be punished," he said quietly. I propped my chin up in one hand, looking at him thoughtfully. "First, look up at me," I ordered. "Don't you have anything to explain for yourself?" His eyes were glistening with a thin layer of tears, the corners reddening slightly. His lips were pressed into a pale, trembling line. I measured it with a protractor. "This is a 45 degrees angle of looking up at the sky to hold back tears. My first sin, meeting you. My second sin, knowing you. My third sin, befriending you. My fourth sin, pleasing you. My fifth sin, missing you. My sixth sin, caring for you. My seventh sin, guarding you. My eighth sin, protecting you. My ninth sin, longing for you. My 10th sin, loving you. I am guilty of all 10 crimes. I deserve to die 1,000 deaths. I take my leave. Enough already." My toes are curling in embarrassment just reading this. I covered my mouth with my sleeve, struggling to hold back a laugh. Su Zhenliu's voice was steady, if a little shaky. I was the one who slipped the poison into his drink. I didn't want your highness to touch him. I dropped my sleeve, my smile fading instantly. Well, that killed the mood. The floating comments had all guessed it was him, but to make sure I wasn't wrongfully accusing him, I'd even sent someone to investigate. And here he was, confessing so readily. His voice trembled as he spoke. How does your highness wish to punish me? I couldn't bear to punish him, but I also didn't want to wrong Xie Yunjian again. I'd already done that once. Balancing the scales between these two was harder than it looked. After thinking it over carefully, I stood up and fetched my whip from its stand. I couldn't bear to have him beaten with wooden boards. A few light lashes would serve as a warning, that would be enough. Su Zhenliu lowered his eyes, but there was a faint glimmer of something bright in them, like stars breaking through the clouds. I grasped the whip, holding back my strength, and flicked it lightly against his chest once. Would you dare to do something like this again? He let out a soft, breathy sigh, his voice coming out a little hoarse when he spoke. I would, me. This was the first time he'd ever dared to disobey me. Reward him with tonics, that way. He'll dare to do bad things again next time. You should take a brass-headed belt and whip him until he spins like a top. A few light lashes are exactly right. The person upstairs sounds like they take advantage of the punishment to beat someone half to death. I set the whip down, defeated. Fine, I said with a sigh. You're incorrigible. I sentence you to 1 month of house arrest instead. Su Zhenliu suddenly reached out and grabbed the hem of my robe, his tone softening instantly. Like a child begging for forgiveness. I won't dare do it again next time, he pleaded. I promise. I really was speechless. There's one more thing, I said, changing the subject. Did you lie to Yuan Shu about your age? He even had the nerve to argue his way out of it. I didn't lie, he said earnestly. I just used my nominal age, that's all. Was that how nominal age worked? He glanced at me, his eyes glinting with a hint of mischief. Does your highness still wish to punish me for that? I shot him a look, utterly helpless against him. No more punishments. You may go back to your room now. I gave Su Zhenliu the cold shoulder for a few days after that, but I didn't summon Xie Yunjian to my chambers either. I had been busy with my own affairs lately. I'd personally overseen the introduction of Western region seeds, having them planted in my own fields, and now, harvest season was upon us, and I needed to go check on them myself. A new batch of girls had recently enrolled in the girls' school I'd founded, and I needed to review their registration forms personally. The autumn hunt was fast approaching, and I still had to recommend several officials from the Princess Mansion to participate. When I was busy with my work, I didn't have the time or energy to care about the chaos going on in my backyard. That's right, even the evil second female lead had her own career to focus on. A person could be a little bit evil, but they couldn't only be evil, otherwise, they'd end up with a terrible fate. On my way back to the mansion from the palace, I walked through the long corridor and ran into someone again. It was Shen Xiao. He was standing in the courtyard, dressed in a tight-fitting martial arts uniform, his robes fluttering in the wind as he waved his sword through the air. His swordsmanship was agile and varied, cold silver light swirling around him like a mist. I stopped to watch him for a few moments, impressed. Su Zhenliu's 2 attendants were up to their usual trouble again. One of them covered his mouth with his sleeve, snickering loudly. Shen Xiao knows how to use a sword, he sang in a mocking tone. The other one chimed in, adding fuel to the fire. Shen Xiao will stop at nothing to climb the ladder of power, he sneered. He'd scheme and plot his way to the top, but even if he told us his plans, we'd never stoop to his level. The floating comments immediately jumped to Shen Xiao's defense. Why are you ganging up on the only honest person here? I stepped forward, standing in front of Shen Xiao, and smiled faintly at him. The autumn hunt is in half a month. Would you be willing to participate? Shen Xiao's intentions had been obvious for a long time, and I was happy to help him out, to give him a chance to show his face in front of my imperial brother. If he succeeded, it would strengthen my own influence. And more famous scholars would be willing to send me their invitations and pay their respects. If he failed, well, I'd still have a handsome man by my side. It was a win-win situation either way. Shen Xiao's eyes lit up like stars. He sheathed his sword, bowing deeply to me with a look of gratitude. I would be honored. He said sincerely, "Thank you for your appreciation, Your Highness." On the side of the road, Su Zhenliu's two attendants froze for a moment, then they leaned in close to each other. Whispering furiously, "It actually worked." One of them whispered in disbelief, "Hurry up and go tell Lord Su. Tell him to go practice his sword at the next intersection." Wouldn't that make Lord Su look desperate, not at all aloof or refined? So what, hasn't he been throwing himself at her feet enough already? "How dare you say that about Lord Su? I really need to have a good talk with you." The two of them immediately started bickering loudly, right there in the middle of the courtyard. They had absolutely no discipline whatsoever. I walked over to them, my lips pressing into a thin, warning line. "Shut your little mouths," I ordered coolly. Finally, the world was quiet again. That night, I started drawing lots. When I'd first gotten my 10 male companions, I'd vowed to be a fair and just princess, to treat them all equally, without favoritism. So I'd had Yuan Shu make lots for me to draw, to decide who would accompany me each night. But thanks to all the fighting and bickering between Su Zhenliu and Xie Yunzhan, I'd never actually gotten around to using them. Now, I wanted to punish Su Zhenliu by ignoring him, and I also felt a little awkward around Xie Yunzhan after wrongfully accusing him. It was the perfect time to finally start drawing lots. First lot drawn, Shen Xiao. I'd already seen him today, I didn't want to see him again tonight. I pulled the lot out and tossed it aside, drawing another one. Second lot drawn, Wei Yiqi. His health was too fragile, pass. Third lot drawn, Attendant A, talked too much, couldn't stand him. Fourth lot drawn, Attendant B, same as above. Fifth lot drawn, Random Guy A, couldn't even match his face to his name, too awkward to sleep with him. Next, floating comments. "Who are you even waiting to draw? When will you stop?" Don't worry about that. There were only 2 lots left. I held my breath, closing my eyes for a moment before slowly drawing one lot. Random Guy B. Almost forgot Xie Yunzhan's name wasn't even on any of the 10 lots. I picked up the last remaining lot with a sigh. Well, no choice then, I muttered to myself. Guess I have to go find Su Zhenliu after all. 666. She's not even pretending anymore. I made my way to Su Zhenliu's courtyard. Sure enough, he was out there practicing his sword. Such a predictable little trick. I was just about to stop and watch him when he suddenly froze. Sheathing his sword in the blink of an eye and turning to bow to me respectfully, the moonlight was bright and clear, bathing the courtyard in a soft, silvery glow like a pool of water stretching out endlessly. He was draped in moonlight, a thin layer of sweat glistening on his temples, his pale jade-like cheeks flushed a faint pink. His voice was warm and gentle, like a spring breeze brushing against my ears. "I pay my respects to Your Highness." It was such a clever, subtle little ploy, and it made the corners of my mouth lift up into a smile involuntarily. I played dumb, feigning surprise. "You know how to use a sword too?" He smiled faintly, a hint of shyness in his eyes. "I studied for a little while once," he admitted modestly. I nodded approvingly. "You wield it beautifully. Would you mind practicing a little longer for me?" He lowered his head slightly, looking even more embarrassed, but in the end, he nodded his agreement. I cajoled and persuaded him, getting him to perform a sword dance for me for a whole hour. I'll never say a bad word about the second female lead again. When there's something good to look at, she really shares it with all of us. The second female lead just asked, and he immediately agreed. After the dance, he asked for water twice to wash up. He scrubbed himself clean from head to toe, then climbed into bed and lay down, waiting for me. Tonight was unusually quiet, no more tricks, no more schemes. He looked like he was truly exhausted. I, however, had been thoroughly captivated by his sword dance for an hour, and I was wide awake, tossing and turning restlessly beside him under the brocade quilt. After wriggling around for a while, I finally made up my mind. I climbed out of bed, pulled the curtains closed tightly, and blew out all the candle flames, plunging the room into complete darkness. Now I could check what the floating comments were saying without being seen. The text floating above my head glowed faintly in the dark. Suddenly black screen. I thought my phone broke. "Hello, can someone turn on the lights? Aren't we supposed to be sneaky and secretive? Who are you? Why won't you let us watch?" I felt relieved knowing they couldn't see anything now. But then I realized I couldn't see anything either. I groped my way forward slowly in the dark, my hands stretched out in front of me, my fingers brushed against the edge of the bed, then I felt a piece of silk fabric, soft, smooth, like the sleeve of Su Junlio's robe hanging down over the side. I kept groping forward. Suddenly, a warm palm covered the back of my hand, stopping me in my tracks. "Why did your highness suddenly put out all the lights?" Su Junlio asked softly, his voice close to my ear. I whispered back, a little shyly, "I'm embarrassed." No matter who it was, no one wanted to be live streaming a moment like this. Su Junlio let out a low, soft laugh, the vibration of his chest warm against my arm. He sat up, then lifted me up effortlessly and pulled me onto his lap, wrapping his arms around my waist. I was a little surprised, blinking in the dark. You can see in the dark. We were so close that his breath fanned against my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. "Your Highness," he replied with a smile, "I am a martial artist. I can see in the dark. Looks like it's time to sign up for a martial arts class. Sneaky sneaky, do you want to go learn martial arts with me? Meow meow meow, you should take some vitamin A supplements. Sister, eat more pork liver." I straddled his lap, my heart pounding nervously in my chest. The people in the floating comments couldn't see anything, but that didn't mean they couldn't hear anything. I had to rely on touch alone now. My fingers traced a path from his collarbone up to his Adam's apple, then finally to his lips, soft, warm, slightly parted. "Shush," I whispered, "don't talk." This was a very serious moment. He nodded his head, his hair brushing against my cheek. I found his lips with mine, pulling my fingers away and pressing my mouth against his gently. "Sisters, looks like we're all here listening to a radio drama now." I turned my volume up to the max, but I still can't hear anything. Su Junlio's palm cupped the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair as he tilted his head and kissed me back, a little more deeply this time. I clutched the front of his robe tightly, my heart racing. This felt like a stolen tryst, forbidden and thrilling. Was it okay to think that? He really didn't make a single sound, just like I'd told him. The only noise in the room was the soft clinking of the jade bracelet on my wrist, occasionally bumping against the porcelain pillow beside us. He moved his fingers gently, unclasping the bracelet from my wrist and setting it aside carefully on the table, eliminating the sound. The next morning, when I woke up, Su Junlio was still keeping silent. Just as I'd asked, the sun was already high in the sky, streaming brightly through the cracks in the curtains. It was the first time I'd slept so soundly in my life. In that post-intimacy calm, I just leaned against Su Junlio's chest, doing absolutely nothing. Oh well. Just lazing in bed for a while longer. Finished listening to the radio drama. Now we're watching a silent film. Here comes the world-famous Charlie Chaplin. What on earth were they rambling about? Did they have something against me? Absolutely ridiculous. I spoke up, lifting Su Junlio's speech ban. "You can talk now." He let out a soft laugh. "Thank you, Your Highness." I stretched out my hand, and he immediately understood, helping me get dressed. I asked him, "Will you be going to the autumn hunt?" He was getting a little spoiled by my favor, teasing me. "Will the imperial consort be going?" Me, of course he will." He lowered his eyes a little dejectedly, tying the sash of my robe neatly. "Then what identity should I use to stay by Your Highness's side?" I rattled off a list: heir to the Marquis of Shinan, state uncle, swordsman, archer, Guqin master, top-tier pretty face, amateur poet, chief villain, my male companion. Su Junlio be like. "So what exactly is our relationship now? Who are you?" "Don't worry about that for now. There's no way so many identities can fit in one spot." Oops, I'd accidentally blurted out a bunch of words he couldn't possibly understand. All things I'd learned from the floating comments. Su Junlio didn't miss a beat, adding his own line smoothly. "And I am the male companion of Princess Chengping, Princess Changle, Princess of Qi, and Princess of Qin." No wonder the male lead and female lead can't beat this villain couple together. They have like a dozen different identities combined. Did the second female lead really have that many titles? I only remember the book mentioning Changle and Princess of Qin. I fell into deep thought. On the contrary, I'd first been granted the title Princess Chengping, then later reassigned to Princess of Qi. Even if Su Junliu had mixed up my titles, he shouldn't have listed 4 of them. A sudden wave of panic washed over me, and I fell silent. Su Junliu noticed the change in my expression, realizing he'd said something wrong, but instead of explaining anything, he just changed the subject. I've had some craftsmen make a few new bows recently. Would your highness like to try them out? I smiled at him. Sure, on the day of the autumn hunt. I rode in the same carriage as Xie Yunzhan, in front of outsiders. We still had to put on a show of being a loving couple, but my mind was elsewhere, and I had little interest in the proceedings. Xie Yunzhan poured me a cup of tea. I took a couple of sips, then set the cup aside. He called my name softly, his voice filled with restrained sorrow. Who are you? I thought that once we talked everything through, we could go back to the way things were. It was a little absurd, I replied. Wasn't this how we were from the very beginning, polite but distant? Or going even further back to the start, I'd chased him relentlessly, while he'd felt absolutely nothing for me. It was only after I'd changed my personality completely that he'd started showing a hint of affection. I asked him a question, my voice low. If I'd stayed the way I was when I was a child, clingy and stubborn, would you still have agreed to marry me? He fell silent for a moment, then answered, who are you? There are no ifs. I picked up my teacup, downed the rest of the tea in 2 big gulps, then blurted out the words I'd been holding back. Let's get a divorce. He closed his eyes, leaning back against the soft cushions inside the carriage. Did Su Junliu whisper sweet nothings in your ear to make you say this? Who are you? Calm down first. Divorce is not a trivial matter. I thought I really should calm down, so I climbed out of the carriage and went to find Su Junliu, when necessary. He could be like Chaplin, extraordinarily quiet. His carriage was also very spacious, plenty of room for him to work his charm. He started brewing tea, casually showing off his handsome profile to me. I wasn't even pretending anymore either. Once we reached the hunting grounds, I left the imperial consort stranded there and went horseback riding with Su Junliu. The wind whipped past my ears. He started putting on an act again. I heard some people talking behind your back, Your Highness. They said that as a princess, you should be a role model for all women, but instead, you've neglected your husband and become entangled with me. You must be feeling wronged, I replied. They're so annoying, Su Junliu said. Indeed, I've sent my attendants to go reason with them, convincing them with virtue, of course. I was a little surprised. Really, I always thought you weren't the type to do things that way. He froze for a moment. What type did your highness think I was? I told him the truth, a very bad person. You have a face that looks like it's good at killing people. Maybe the floating comments had biased me against him from the start. Su Junliu's expression stiffened. He held the horse's reins with one hand, pulling a bronze mirror out with the other to check his reflection. A face that belonged to a gentle, refined young master. Nothing wrong with it at all. He looked up, just about to speak, when an arrow suddenly shot past, flying right between us. Oh no. We were under attack. Palace banquets and autumn hunts were always dangerous places. Anything could happen, but I'd always loved crashing these kinds of events, confident that I'd never be the target. Turns out I'd been sorely mistaken today. A group of men dressed in black, their faces covered, were darting through the woods. I pulled 3 arrows from my quiver, drawing my bow and shooting them off one after another. I should have hit all 3 targets, but the floating comments were blocking my view, and one arrow missed completely. RNO, don't kill our second female lead. She hasn't even done anything evil yet. Bet there's a cliff jumping scene coming up. 3, 2, 1. Jump. This mountain looks so familiar. Didn't the female lead jump off it when the second female lead was chasing her? You can get ready to jump now, sneaky girl. Head west, there are lots of trees below to break your fall. You jump. He jumps. Me, really? I hadn't been in the mood for hunting anyway. I just wanted to go horseback riding for a bit. I hadn't brought many arrows, and they ran out quickly. Our horse got shot in the leg too. I jumped off in time, grabbing Su Junliu, who was still shooting arrows rapidly, and started running for our lives. As we ran, he actually let out a weird little laugh. Your Highness, we're sharing weal and woe now. Oh no, was I only just realizing now that he was a little crazy? He shielded me with his body, running westward, taking an arrow to the shoulder in the process. We ran until we reached the end of the path only to find a cliff ahead. I grabbed his hand tightly. From here, we jumped down together. His face was pale from blood loss, but there was a bright, almost feverish glint in his eyes. Abandoning life. Finally, we can die together. Me, damn it. The gentle, considerate confidant had suddenly turned into a lunatic at the moment of life and death. I didn't even have time to question him, because he hugged me tightly and jumped off the cliff without hesitation. Dizzying, it seemed like the floating comments weren't entirely reliable after all. I thud into the river below, hitting the water so hard it felt like I'd nearly died on impact. My life flashed before my eyes, memories that felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I was 7 years old, being bullied by my third imperial brother, under the pretense of playing. He'd pushed me to the ground, splitting my forehead open. My foster mother had ignored me. I'd gone 2 whole days with that bleeding wound on my forehead. Once, when the imperial tutor was privately testing my studies, Xie Yunjian, who should have already gone home, had stayed behind. He'd secretly slipped me a small porcelain bottle of medicine. Thanks to that bottle of medicine, I'd avoided getting a permanent scar, perhaps out of pity. He'd looked after me from time to time, but he'd always kept me at a distance. Trapped in my own miserable circumstances, I'd become even more determined to pluck the moon from the sky to win over someone who was out of my reach. Twisted, dark thoughts had grown in my heart toward him. After my mother was restored to her position, she'd showered me with doting affection. No one had ever taught me right from wrong. They'd only wanted to make up for my past sufferings, to make me happy. I'd become arrogant and conceited, looking down on everyone around me. Even though I'd known Xie Yunjian already had someone he liked, I'd still forced him to marry me. I'd slipped a love potion into his drink. He'd gritted his teeth, resisting the effects with all his willpower. But everyone had seen us in our disheveled state afterward, and he'd been forced to marry me. Then, just like the floating comments had said, he'd kept himself pure and chaste for Wei Yuan. He'd treated me with cold indifference, but back then, I'd been a complete psychopath. The colder he was to me, the more obsessed I'd become. I'd forced myself on him, cornering him until he had no way out, until he'd had no choice but to rebel against me. When all was lost, I'd still clung to him foolishly, asking, Xie Yunjian, did you ever have even a sliver of feelings for me? He'd cut me off sharply. No, my heart shattered into a million pieces, and I'd thrown myself straight at his sword, and just like that I'd died. In this long, tragic story, Su Zhenliu had been there too. He hadn't been some elegant, refined nobleman, he'd been a cruel, vicious playboy who'd colluded with me, helping me commit all sorts of terrible deeds. He'd loved wearing bright, gaudy colors, coral red, canary yellow, willow green. He'd also worn his hair in a high ponytail, the long black strands cascading down his back like a waterfall of ink, his hair ribbon fluttering dramatically with every move he made. Xie Yunjian had once insulted him, calling him my lapdog. He just grinned and taken it in stride, then turned around and shot an arrow straight through Xie Yunjian's hair crown. We'd both been terrible people, and we'd both been completely insane. On Xie Yunjian's 23rd birthday, I'd pretended to want to reconcile with him only to slip another potion into his tea. My methods had really been so unoriginal, but Xie Yunjian had learned his lesson. He'd secretly swapped our teacups, making me drink the potion instead. In the throes of the drug's effects, delirious with desire, I'd sent for Su Zhenliu. I'd cried while trying to tear off his clothes. Xie Yunjian had burst through the door with the antidote in hand only to find my undergarment hanging from Su Zhenliu's waist. His face had turned as black as thunder, the medicine bowl in his hand had shattered on the ground. He'd turned around and walked away without a word. I'd been in such a hurry to chase after him, but Su Zhenliu had grabbed my wrist, pulling me back. His face had been just as dark. Do you really like that man so much? I'd mumbled dejectedly. Yes. Su Zhenliu had been so angry he'd refused to speak to me for days. Xie Yunjian had also ignored me for days. I'd scrambled between the two of them, trying to please both, driving myself to the brink of madness. That's just how I'd been, both evil and stupid, turning a bad situation into something even worse. On the day Xie Yunjian's army stormed the capital, Su Zhenliu had made up with me. He'd lifted me onto his horse with one arm, galloping away to save me. We'd still had 10,000 soldiers under our command. He'd held me tightly in his arms, pulling an arrow from his quiver, drawing his bowstring, and shooting an arrow straight through Xie Yunjan's shoulder. Sister, I will keep you safe, if we can survive this. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. You run away by yourself, I told him. I don't want to live anymore. He fell silent for a moment, then asked me, why? I tilted my head up slightly. The sun was shining so brightly I couldn't see the expression on his face clearly. My voice choked up with sobs as I said, this mess we're in, it's all my fault. I did everything wrong. If there's a next life, I want to live properly. I don't want to be a bad person anymore. I'd struggled free from his arms, jumping off the horse and rolling several times on the ground before finally managing to stagger to my feet, limping away in the opposite direction. My vision was blurred with tears. Through the haze, I'd seen Xie Yunjan pointing his sword at me. I'd been too exhausted to speak, but it was like I'd been possessed. Words spilled from my lips involuntarily. Xie Yunjan, did you ever have even a sliver of? And sure enough, he'd said no. My heart had turned to ash as I'd walked toward my death. Just before my consciousness faded away, I'd thought to myself, I shouldn't have ended up like this. But I'd never gotten the chance to say those final words to Su Zhenliu. I rubbed my eyes, staring blankly for a moment. Where exactly are we? He fell silent for a beat, then spoke up, sounding guilty. At the home of Wei Yuan's uncle, me. Wow. What a coincidence. The moment I remembered how I'd wronged her in the past, she went and saved my life. The wooden door creaked open. Wei Yuan walked in carrying a wooden tray with 2 bowls of medicine on it. 1 bowl for me, 1 for Su Zhenliu, a dose for each of us. She set the medicine down on the table beside the bed, seizing the chance while the tray was empty. I suddenly sat up, unclasped the dented gold chain around my neck, and placed it on the tray. For you, she stared at me in surprise. No need, I don't help people expecting anything in return. I pressed on. Do you want to get into the Imperial Academy of Medicine? I can pull some strings for you. She shook her head. Really, it's not necessary. I came to the capital this time to prove that I can get into the Imperial Academy of Medicine on my own merits. I racked my brain for another offer. What about the director's position? Then, do you want that? I'll make that old man step down and hand it over to you right away. Wei Yuan fell silent. It looked like she was tempted after all. Are you really using this to test the female lead whose ancestral home is Shandong? The male lead can totally take a backseat. There's a new power couple in town. She looked a little embarrassed, her face and neck turning bright red as she mumbled shyly, I do want it. Finally, something she wanted. I slammed my palm down on my thigh so hard it made me grimace in pain. Great, my savior, I swear I'll make it happen for you. Her eyes widened like she'd just woken up from a dream. Miss, are you someone of high status in the palace? I replied, I'm the emperor's own sister, the eldest princess of Qi. While the second female lead was unconscious, the villain went to great lengths to hide their identities, terrified that you two would start fighting once you found out who each other was. Turns out the female lead doesn't remember, and the second female lead doesn't hold grudges. Wei Yuan bowed deeply to me. I quickly waved her off. No need for such formalities. I only stayed at Wei Yuan's place for 1 day. Soon enough, a group of people came to pick me up. Leading them was Xie Yunjan. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. He shot a glance at Su Zhenliu beside me, his expression clouding over with displeasure, but he didn't say anything. I brought Wei Yuan back to the princess mansion with me too, and just like that, I'd taken in the male lead, female lead, and the villain. Just kidding. I don't want the male lead, even though I once bullied him relentlessly. His rebellion left me with a bit of a psychological trauma. Can't handle that. The floating comments didn't lie to me. My injuries weren't serious, and I recovered quickly. The day I was fully healed, I went to the palace again, knelt down in front of my imperial brother, and put on a pious expression. His eye twitched. What are you up to now? Getting the response I wanted, I started making my wishes. I want a divorce from Xie Yunjan. He let out a huge sigh of relief. Granted, he celebrated too soon. Because I kept going, I want the position of director of the Imperial Academy of Medicine to be given to Wei Yuan. My brother frowned. That's not appropriate. Throughout history, no woman has ever held that position before. I didn't care about that. I cranked up the volume and started wailing. It all goes back to when I was just born. Wei Yuan is the one who saved my life. His expression turned serious. Do you know why you were attacked? Yeah, I knew. I'd stepped on someone's toes. I'd forced a young lady from a minister's family who was already engaged to become one of my female officials. When the officials went to provide disaster relief, I'd tagged along just to meddle, and even asked for all the account books so I could practice my arithmetic. I kept crying, but thanks to Wei Yuan, they didn't manage to kill me. She's my lifesaver. Besides, that old director of the Imperial Academy of Medicine is useless. He even fed me cinnabar once, which made me so stupid I can't even win an argument anymore. You have to get justice for me. My brother sighed. Fine, granted. I wiped my tears and looked up. There's one more thing. My brother, am I not even allowed to live in peace? You're making 3 wishes at once, I said. It's simple. Su Zhanliu and I, an unmarried man and woman, spent so much time alone together. It's ruined his reputation. I have to take responsibility for him. My brother chuckled. I thought you were deliberately refusing to give him a title just for the thrill of it. Granted, it was pretty thrilling, to be honest. But I couldn't very well admit that, no matter how bold I was, I couldn't have 2 imperial consorts at the same time. I headed back to the princess mansion. Before leaving the palace, I helped myself to a few bolts of Shu brocade that had been tribute from the Shu region. I had a gaudy matching couple's outfit made for myself and Su Zhanliu. Su Zhanliu, who only ever wore light-colored clothes, looked completely at a loss when he saw his bright red new robe. I leaned against the doorframe, smiling as I lifted his chin with my folding fan. I remember you used to love wearing bright colors. He stared at me blankly for a moment, his eyes reddening at the corners. You remember? Yeah, we hugged each other and cried our hearts out. No, we didn't. We poured our hearts out to each other. Once we were done with that, I turned my attention to handling today's business. Shen Xiao had caught some of the assassins during the autumn hunt, and my brother was so impressed he'd transferred him from my mansion to serve in the palace. Even though Wei Qi was weak, he was extremely talented at writing. I'd strong-armed him into working at the imperial court, making him my personal word warrior to argue on my behalf. I assigned the remaining male companions to various tasks as well. The floating comments still loved to chime in. I kind of feel sorry for them instead of being kept as pretty playthings. They're now forced to work like oxen and horses. What kind of talk was that? Absolutely ridiculous. I still loved reading the floating comments, though. They were all so funny and their comments were always so entertaining, like this one, for example. And so, the second female lead and the main villain lived happily ever after. The end. Throw the confetti. Su Zhanliu's extra story. It wasn't until the moment he died by Xie Yunzhan's sword that Su Zhanliu realized he was a character in a book. Huiyu had been destined from birth to be the way she was. First, she'd suffered oppression and neglect. Then she'd received kindness and care from Xie Yunzhan. Because of that small act of kindness, she'd fallen deeply in love with him, willing to do anything to have him for herself. Su Zhanliu hated that fate. As for himself, he'd been written as a villain who would obey Huiyu unconditionally. That fate, he could accept. Su Zhanliu was reborn. He came back to life when he was only 4 years old. It was such an awkward age. He couldn't even climb over the walls of his own house, let alone go assassinate the 9-year-old Xie Yunzhan. He was on the verge of a breakdown, but he refused to sit around and do nothing. He had to talk to his sister. Su Yuten watched him climb up onto a chair and sit down properly before taking a seat across from him. She poured herself a cup of tea, and for Su Zhanliu, she poured a cup of hot water. Little kids shouldn't drink tea, alright? What is it you want to say? Spit it out quickly. Su Zhanliu had another mini mental breakdown right then and there. Sister, I heard the emperor is looking for a new study companion for the eldest princess. Su Yuten shot him a glance. You're too young. Besides, the emperor only wants girls for the position. Su Zhanliu. That's not what I meant. I was asking if you'd be willing to take the job. Su Yuten. I'm not interested. Su Zhanliu took off the gold lock around his neck and the 2 gold bracelets on his wrists, placing all the gold he'd saved up over the years onto the table. Su Yuten smiled as she took all the gold. Now I'm interested. Su Zhenliu cared deeply about his eldest sister. The two of them often stayed up late at night talking by candlelight. Have you met Her Highness yet? I have. But the eldest princess isn't allowed to play with me. She doesn't even recognize me. So I haven't had a chance to talk to her alone. I asked someone to pass along that ointment you gave me to her. Who did you ask to deliver it? Xie Yunjian. He has quite a lot of connections. Su Zhenliu. He was having another mental breakdown. I also asked Xie Yunjian to give her all those little trinkets you gave me too. Hey, why are you crying? He'd thought that if he did all the kind things Xie Yunjian was supposed to do for her first, then Huiyu would fall for him instead. He never imagined that all those good deeds would still end up being credited to Xie Yunjian. He closed his eyes in resignation. He wished he could open them again and suddenly be 17 years old enough to fight for Huiyu's attention. No, wait, 17 would be too late. By then, she would have already been married to Xie Yunjian. In a quiet corner no one paid attention to. Su Zhenliu's heart shattered into a million pieces. The 10-year-old Su Zhenliu was a busy little boy. He tracked down his two most loyal subordinates from his previous life and started building his own power base, then began scheming to sabotage Xie Yunjian at every turn. When Xie Yunjian returned to the capital after going back to his hometown to observe the mourning period for his deceased relative, Su Zhenliu sent someone to sneak out in the dead of night and remove the wheels from Xie Yunjian's carriage. Don't come back. Su Zhenliu had originally wanted to just kill Xie Yunjian outright. But she'd said she wanted to be a good person in her next life. Just hold on, be patient. Su Yuten got engaged to the crown prince. Su Zhenliu took out all the gold he'd earned since his rebirth and started hinting wildly at his sister. Su Yuten took the gold. I know what you want me to take Princess Chengping out to play, right? Su Zhenliu nodded eagerly. Yes, and persuade her to be a good person. She's very open to persuasion. After all, that was how she was written, he added quickly. Also, say some bad things about Xie Yunjian. And a few good things about me too. Su Yuten shot him a glance, smiling meaningfully. I already did. She said you're a really interesting person, and she wished her own younger brother was more like you. Hey, don't look so sad, I'm just messing with you. Su Zhenliu never expected that. Because of his meddling, Wei Yuan and Xie Yunjian never got the chance to become close. What's more, Xie Yunjian actually fell in love with the current version of Huiyu. Wait a minute, who did he think he was? He'd never treated her that well in his previous life. Filled with resentment, Su Zhenliu started pounding herbs furiously, increasing the dosage of the medicine he was making. Xie Yunjian had to be rendered impotent. By then, he would be 18 years old enough to swoop in and take Huiyu for himself. He'd lived 2 lifetimes now. He knew all her likes and dislikes, all her past experiences. Even though his 2 lifetimes combined weren't even 40 years, he was definitely better at charming her than Xie Yunjian ever could be. Perfect plan.